The true story of a kid who was obsessed with the PlayStation game slash driving simulator Gran Turismo, who ends up becoming a real-life race car driver. Neill Blomkamp came out of the gate swinging for the fences with his classic 2009 alien film District 9. No one had that movie on their radars when it came out, but it had a bit of a moment, and it became one of the best original sci-fi films of the 2000s. Now, I admittedly did not see any of Blomkamp's other films, and from what I heard, they actually kind of got ho-hum reviews, and many people thought maybe he was a one-hit wonder. So when I heard they were making a Gran Turismo movie based off of the PlayStation game, I was less than excited. Now, I played the heck out of the PlayStation 2 version of this game in college, but the later releases, they got a bit too realistic and took a bit too much time for me to really get into. Now, I did borrow a full racing setup from a friend of mine about 5 years ago to play the virtual reality version of Gran Turismo on the PlayStation 4. I thought if I was behind the wheel of the car, I could feel the steering wheel, I could feel the gear shift, I could feel the pedals, that I'd really get into this game. My dad thought the same thing, and he was very excited to come up and give it a try. So we took turns racing for about 5 minutes each before we both felt like we were going to puke. As it turns out, when your eyes think you're traveling at 200 miles an hour around a track, but your body is sitting still, things get out of whack pretty quickly. But as I started to hear more about the movie Gran Turismo, and that it wasn't really about the PlayStation game, but it was about a real-life kid obsessed with a game who became a real-life race car driver, I actually started to get a little bit more interested. That's one of those stranger-than-fiction stories that I just cannot believe is true. The movie itself, it's well made. The racing scenes are intense. The sound design is top-notch. Now, I'm 99% sure that some of the racing scenes in the movie are actually just screen captures from the PlayStation 5 version of Gran Turismo. I'm sure that saved the film crew a ton of money, and it also doubles as a marketing tool for how realistic the game looks, because if you're not looking closely, it does not look computer generated. The fact that I don't know for 100% if the shots in the movie were actual races or CGI from the PlayStation game, that says something about how realistic this game looks. The actual beats of the movie and the acting were all super cookie cutter though, so without knowing the real story that the movie was based on, I still knew exactly what was going to happen pretty much in every scene of the movie. An example being when a character loses a race and he says, "It wasn't my fault that I lost that race, there was an issue with the brakes." And his coach tells him, "Quit making excuses, the cars were all checked and the brakes were fine, and besides, you're not even a real race car driver, you play video games." Well, wouldn't you know it, the mechanic looks at the car again and the brakes were indeed messed up in the exact way that the gamer said they were. Cut to the coach with that look, man, this kid actually knows what he's talking about. Now, when the Nissan marketing executive who has the idea of a real race featuring the world's best video game players, he's trying to coax a driver out of retirement to train these drivers to race real cars. And that driver doesn't want to do it. He says, "I think my racing days are in my rear view," which is the most obvious and eye-rolling and least clever way to say that in a movie about racing. Now, the Nissan exec is played by Orlando Bloom, who when I first saw the trailer, I was convinced it was actually Matthew Morrison from Glee. His character is so cliche and was probably my least favorite part of the movie. Now, the driving instructor, played by David Harbour, he's this grumpy, washed-up race car driver, and you know he's going to turn over a new leaf by the end of the film. As I say, every single beat of this movie is pretty predictable. The heart of the film is Jan Mardenborough, who is played by Archie Madekwe, as the young gamer with the one-track mind of becoming a real race car driver. Now, as cliche as the movie is, there were a couple of pretty emotional scenes that I wasn't expecting. Jan's family is fairly one-dimensional, but they are the source of these emotional scenes in the movie, and they did add something to the film. His mom was played by Jerry Halliwell, aka Ginger Spice, who didn't even know she was an actress. Now, one thing that bugged me about the movie is there were some revisions that really shouldn't have made it to the final cut of the film. As an example, in one of the early races, Jan makes a comment that he is 6 seconds behind the leader, and immediately after a guy says, "Here comes the final turn of the race," and then Jan overtakes the person to win the race. Even if he was 0.6 seconds behind, there would not have been enough time to pass somebody on the final turn of the race. It's little things like this that should really have been picked up in editing and never made it to the final cut of the film. But also, this isn't really a movie that needs to be super realistic. It's just a heartwarming underdog story. But at the same time, the movie is about how realistic the game is. They should have spent a little more time trying to make the movie realistic as well. So Gran Turismo, it's exactly what you think it is. Based on a true story. Surprisingly, it actually sticks pretty close to the true events. In biopic fashion, it really is just a greatest hits version of Jan's life. It's super cliche, but the action-packed racing scenes and the predictable underdog story and those couple of emotional scenes are really enough to make this movie worth watching. Ginger Spice, going airborne at 200 miles an hour, going from video games to real-life race car driving, listening to a Walkman in the 21st century, only playing Gran Turismo.